Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Gray Matter podcast. I'm your spiritual gangster, sponsored by Pure Athletics. They have many great products, including the whole spiritual gangster line. You also have Corkscrew cups. This is my Marvel one. Has some significance because the guest I have on today, we have an ongoing discussion about who is the greatest Marvel hero. I say it's Thor. He says Spider-Man. So we'll get him to talk about that a little bit. But really, the theme today is freedom. The opening of the show, the music we have is by design. This is what we talk about so much on our program. And so today's program is entitled Freedom Fighter, because the guest that we have on, I'm very thrilled to have him here. Had the pleasure of being on his own podcast, the Chris and Carrie show, with Chris Scott. Chris is a freedom fighter. And as I said, I'm thrilled to have him on the program today. And we're going to get to talk a lot about some of the things that he has done, why I've put that label, ascribed that label to him. But before we go there, I want to take the pulse of freedom in Canada just for a moment. Today there was a news story that I saw that released a World Freedom Review, which rates the most free countries in the world. And Canada is now treading water way down at number 163. We're running neck and neck with countries like Lebanon, Mali, and Ukraine. That's Ukraine. That's the country that presently is under siege, at war, being invaded by Russia. So Canada is considered about as free today as Ukraine. And while this is going on, our estimable Prime Minister was in the EU Parliament today, in front of an audience of almost no one. That would be at Noah body, calling people like our guest, who were involved in the Freedom Convoy, cynical populists. Of course, part of the reason why there was nobody there is because there was a very concerted effort by a Finnish member of the EU Parliament to actually have Prime Minister Trudeau censured. That means that he would not be allowed to speak there because of the way that he violated the constitutional rights of the freedom protesters, principally their right to peacefully protest. And of course, when the EU, notwithstanding that objection, permitted him to speak, the vast majority of the members of the EU Parliament simply decided to book out. So if you go and you watch this online, this video of him calling the Freedom Convoy protesters cynical populists who turned citizens against their government, you're going to see somewhat encouragingly that the room is relatively empty. So our program, for those of you who have tuned in to the first few episodes, has a certain format. And part of it is we have quotations, usually from famous people, from great minds who are going to frame the discussion. Because today's topic is freedom, and of course the freedom from government overreach and government oppression, which is what we're living with today in Canada and in many places throughout the world. I've chosen a few quotations on this topic. The first is from a German philosopher named Friedrich Nietzsche. And he wrote this a couple hundred years ago. He said, "Government is the coldest of all cold monsters. Coldly it lies, and in this lie slips from its mouth, I, government, am the people. Everything government says is a lie, and everything government has, it has stolen." The reason why I mentioned that is I was reminded of that quotation when I saw what Prime Minister Trudeau had said today. And basically he said that the Freedom Convoy protesters, that they weren't representing the people, that it was the government that oppressed them, the government that sent in police to take apart this peaceful protest. That's the government that actually is the people. And of course, what Nietzsche said 200 years ago is still true today, and that is a lie. and that today we can all see, or we should be able to see, that governments in Canada, especially our federal government, are working against the people and working undemocratically. Of course, only yesterday we learned that this unholy, undemocratic alliance was formed between the Liberal government and the NDP, federal NDP party, which makes the federal NDP party functionally irrelevant. And I would take the position that they should be disqualified from even having a presence in Parliament now, since they've simply subsumed themselves within the Liberal Party of Canada. A second quotation I want to point to is one from William Pitt the Younger, who was a very famous British Prime Minister and a great advocate of freedom. Was very much involved in the emancipation movement in Britain, the emancipation of slaves. And he said that necessity is the argument of tyrants, it is the creed of slaves. And again, this ties into the position that was taken by the federal government, the Trudeau government, about taking apart the protest. And the last one I want to mention, which is really, which I really love, is one that I know our guest has seen. It's one that was put on the back of a large truck, a rig, and this is during the Freedom Convoy. And it says, "I'd rather die on my feet than live on my knees." There it is. That's a beautiful
I saw that
thing.
there.
I'm sure you did. All right, so let's greet our guest. This is Chris Scott. How are you today, Chris?
I'm good, Leighton. How are you?
I'm well, thank you, and thank you so much for joining us. I know that you're returning the favor. I had the pleasure of appearing on your show last week, and for about 2 hours, we just had a blast. Anybody who hasn't taken in the Chris and Carrie show really need to do so. It's on Chris's Facebook page. How would people, if people wanted to tune into the show, Chris, how would they do that?
So we run the Chris and Carrie show on the Whistle Stop Café Facebook page, and the reason we do that is because I think we got 120,900 followers or something on there. So it's a big audience, and a lot of those people follow the page specifically for stuff like the Chris and Carrie show. And of course, there's been times where Facebook has dropped us down in the priority list and changed their algorithm so we don't pop up in people's news feeds. But what people have been doing is they do the positive Facebook things. So like the page, follow the page, share the content, and then it brings it up in their notifications, and it'll pop up and say the show's on, or any live that we're doing as soon as it starts. So
they
share,
can
follow.
just jump on there and then just click. They could become a follower of the show, or a follower of your page.
Yeah, they would just follow the page, and then all of the live streams pop up as notification windows on their phones.
Terrific. So 121,000 followers. So let's talk a little bit about you and how you came to have so many followers, and more importantly, what you're doing with that following, because I think this is a very important and really an inspiring story for anyone who's consuming this podcast. Your story, and I've labeled you a freedom fighter, to me is a story of what one person can do if they decide that they're going to make a difference. So a couple of years ago, let's talk about you a little bit. So you were born and raised in Alberta, Chris, or where are you from originally?
No, I was not. I was born in Campbell River, BC, on Vancouver Island. And then we moved to Kamloops when I was 1, lived there till I was 14, and we moved back to Campbell River. I didn't actually move out to Alberta until 2000.
So what brought you out to Alberta?
The rigs. What else?
Of course. So how long did you work on the rigs?
Just over 20 years.
Wow.
So quite a while.
But at some point you made a decision you were going to start your own business. Was that after you sort of got married and started raising a family, or what made you decide to start a business?
So I've had a couple other businesses in the last 10 years. My oil field career led me into owning my own business, which was basically just a one-man show doing oil field consulting. Then I had a boiler business. I had a roster of 38 people at one time. $1 million of equipment, and we kind of made a go of it. We didn't get wealthy or anything like that, but we made a go of it and got out of it okay. But what ended up happening is I actually decided to buy the Whistle Stop because spending 20 years in the oil patch, it was always a feast or famine thing. And as we've seen in the last, I guess, probably 8 to 10 years, our energy industry has been vilified and persecuted beyond any beyond any form of reason.
Mm-hmm.
And it always perseveres because we need energy. That's not going to change, and our demand for energy keeps increasing. But as the industry is vilified, we have this ebb and flow of prosperity in that industry, and I just got sick of it. The last straw was I was actually working in South America, in Colombia, as a superintendent for an oil company down there, and I was on days off, and I just my new boss just decided not to bring me back, and I thought, well, you know what? Enough of this. I'm going to do something different. I'm tired of the feast or famine. I'm tired of being away all the time. I wanted to be closer to home, and the Whistle Stop had been for sale for a couple of years, and I knew the owner fairly well, so I thought, wow, that's maybe I'll just take a dive into that. It was a great piece of real estate. It was a turnkey business. It was already operating, and I thought to myself, well, I'll just buy this business and I'll run it exactly the way it is right now with the same staff that's there. And I'll be kind of hands off. And if it doesn't do well, then I'll just go back and work in the oil patch, and I can pay for it. But that didn't work out because I lost a couple cooks and I was forced to get in the kitchen and start cooking, which I had never done before in a commercial application. And it didn't take me long to realize that I loved it. I love serving people. I love serving food. I like watching people enjoy their meals so much that they eat too much and waddle out the door, picking up a package of Tums on the way out. I really enjoyed it. So, I've been saying this whole time, there's a silver lining to every dark cloud, and my dark cloud, losing my job in South America, the silver lining was that it opened my life up to a new chapter. One that I find extremely fulfilling, and I'm happy that I went down that path.
So the Whistle Stop Cafe is located in Muir, Alberta. So whereabouts is Muir, Alberta in relation to, say, Red Deer, Edmonton, Calgary?
So you nailed it. Where is Muir? Exactly. Prior to all this, Muir was a kind of a middle of nowhere type place. And that's not saying there's anything wrong with the place. It's a great town. It's quiet most of the time. But yeah, it wasn't quite on the map as it is now. In days gone by, it was actually considered to be the capital of Alberta. And the reason for that is during the steam locomotive days, it was a very, very busy place because we had the round table for turning the steam engines around. There's a reservoir here for refilling the water tanks on the trains, and it's very central. So we are from Red Deer. We're 45 minutes north by northeast. So if you draw a line from Red Deer to Camrose, we're almost right in the middle, right off of the west shore of Buffalo Lake, which actually would be the Narrows.
Okay. So how long ago did you acquire the cafe?
I took over in July 2019.
And up until that time, I take it that you were living, a hardworking guy, relatively apolitical life, more or less. You weren't involved in politics, or you weren't a political activist or anything of that nature. Is that fair?
No. Yeah, exactly. And the most I got into politics was when the NDP was busy trying to destroy the province and everybody's lives within. I'm just turning my phone on Do Not Disturb here. I got involved then because I knew we had to get rid of the NDP and at least have a chance to be prosperous in this province. So I did my part. I became members of Wild Rose and the PCs, and I was very, very vocal about the merging and getting us back on track and sharing information about why we needed to get rid of the NDP and elect the UCP as our government. But I didn't do that until it affected me. 2013, I was working for CNRL in Wabasca as a oil field well site supervisor, and things got really bad. So 2013, 2014, I got through that with my my skin intact, so to speak. 2015, I ended up losing that job, and it was April 2015. And I remember thinking to myself, what other job could I possibly do that would afford me anything even close to the quality of life I was enjoying at the time? And there was really nothing. And I knew that it shouldn't be like that because Alberta is so resource rich. The way we produce our oil and our industry works here, it's extremely ethical and clean, world class. And yeah, 2015, I lost my job, and then I decided, well, I better get politically involved and engaged because I need the world to be better for me and my kids. And unfortunately, that's the way most people are, especially here in Canada. We are very, very non-civically engaged in this country because people don't get involved until things affect them. And as Canadians, we rarely have anything that affects us, so we just don't get involved. And it's a shame, but that's the way it is.
It's funny that you mentioned that because I had the pleasure of speaking recently with Brian Peckford, who's a former premier of Newfoundland. And of course, as you know, he's been very outspoken. He has actually a charter challenge that's being heard right now. And he mentioned this. He said that one of the major things that's changed since the time that he was in politics, say in the 1970s and 80s, is this disconnection of grassroots involvement in political life, especially among young people. And that connects up with something that I heard Preston Manning say recently about how when grassroots people are not involved in politics, even down to things like recreational boards and school boards and things like that, that the elites move in and they start to do all the damage when nobody's looking. So coming back to you though, things are going along fine. You're getting involved and enjoying your restaurant, and then along comes the COVID-19 pandemic. And this is when your life really, really changes fundamentally. And of course, there are restrictions placed upon the operation of your restaurant. And in that moment, you made a very fateful decision. Would you like to tell us about that?
Sure. So when COVID started rearing its ugly and not so relevant head, so to speak, I immediately had the same feeling I did during the H1N1 deal and SARS and that, which was, that sucks. Really hope I don't get that, but we'll get through it. And I never actually expected that the government would take the steps they did or pull as blatant of an overreach as they did. I just thought we'd kind of like skate through it, and maybe they'll put some weird rules in place, but it's whatever, we'll be fine. I totally didn't expect what happened. And I think at first it was mandatory masking outside, or mandatory masking. I think it was everywhere. And I never wore a mask. I just kind of thought, whatever, it's just another one of these H1N1 things. And once they targeted me and my business, I really started to think about what was going on, why it was going on, how they were doing the things they were doing, and the implications that meant for me and those around me. And we watched Jason Kenney flip-flop a number of times. We watched him apologize to Alberta, saying that they should never have decided which businesses were essential, which ones weren't. They were never going to do that again. They were going to handle it differently. And then a week later, he shut us down again. And I was absolutely livid because by this point, we knew enough about COVID. We'd seen enough evidence. There was enough statistics that we would have been able to make a informed decision as to our path forward. But instead, they just continued to behave as though COVID was so mysterious. We didn't know anything about it. It was going to kill everybody on the planet, and we had to shut the whole world down. But I saw it, and so did those around me. So that December, I decided that I'm going to get through this last lockdown. I think they had said January 14th or something, they were going to reopen restaurants. And I said, if they don't, I'm opening anyway, because this is BS, and I'm not going to be part of this. I'm not going to let them destroy my lives or destroy our lives. That date rolled around. They said, well, one more week. And I was like, oh, okay, I don't want to make any waves. I'm just going to do it. But after that, I'm definitely going to open. And sure enough, that I think it was January. My sister says I'm wrong, but I think it was January 21st. Hinshaw went live and said, we're not removing the restrictions. There is no end in sight. And that was it. Because it's one thing to have a plan and know what you're doing. It's a complete different story when you don't have a plan, you don't have an exit strategy, and you're basically telling people that you need to have your lives impacted forever. So that was the day I said, nope. I had a conversation with my staff. I had a conversation with my family and some of my customers, and we opened in defiance of the ridiculous, overreaching COVID mandates and measures.
So at that point, you knew that you were risking losing your restaurant, but also potentially losing your liberty. This is January of 21, and by that time, the whole writing of tickets and penalizing people was in full force. And so, but you decided that you were taking a stand, but part of the reason why you were doing that was in support of liberty, right? That was a main impetus for your decision. Am I right about that, or was that part of your thinking at the time?
It is. Yeah, you're correct there. And another part of that was we started hearing stories about people that had been adversely affected by the mandates themselves. In particular, the story of the one that really got me was how in British Columbia, they were if your family member was dying, they gave them an iPad, and they gave you an iPad, and you got to spend your family member's last moments with them in front of a screen. And I tried to put myself in, imagine I was in that situation. So my mother's in the hospital, and actually she did go in for some major surgery around that time. And I said something like this to her. Now I don't believe in violence, but if my mother is dying in the hospital and they're telling me that I can't go and hold my mother in my arms while she passes, there will be a trail of security guards unconscious on the floor, because there's nothing getting between me and my mother. And the feeling that I got thinking about that potential that my mom could die, and that's how I had to say goodbye to her, I realized that there were thousands and thousands of people out there who had actually experienced that. And it made me absolutely sick. That was a big one. Another one was our elderly were being locked up in care homes, and basically they were just kind of choosing to not want to live anymore because they were prisoners in their own little long-term care cells. And that stuff absolutely disgusted me. And those things didn't affect me personally, but I was able to kind of understand what it might feel like to have that happen. So that was another reason why I did that, is because I was hearing about how other people were being affected by this, and it was disgusting. So somebody had to stand up and do something, and I knew it was going to take more than just meeting at the legislature and having a rally or holding a protest someplace. I knew that somebody had to potentially martyr themselves to bring attention to the other side of the story in this situation.
So you felt that strongly that you had to take a risk. You had to have put some of your own skin in the game. When was the first time that it became obvious to you that both you and the Whistle Stop were being targeted by Alberta Health Services and the Alberta government, that you were being made an example of?
That's a good question. I haven't really thought of that.
Was it around that time, right around the time when you decided in January of 21, when you decided to reopen despite the restrictions, or was it earlier than that?
You know what? It was actually earlier than that, because during the first part of the lockdowns, we just went along with it. We wore our masks. We did our thing. We used our hand sanitizer so much that our skin cracked. We didn't flout the law or the rules. And we had heard a lot of stories about families having really tough time with this, being isolated in their homes and not getting out and having fun and doing family things. And I came up with this plan to have a physically distanced drive-in movie theater. So I had no money at this point, or very little, and everyone thought I was crazy. But I bought a projector, I bought an inflatable 10 by 14 foot movie screen, and an FM transmitter, and I strapped that sucker to the roof of my restaurant, and I played drive-in movies on that. The first one was what did we play first? I want to say Minions. And there was about 6 or 8 cars in the parking lot. And I thought, this is great. This is a way to get people out of their homes. You know, we can help them to improve their family life during this pandemic where they can't do anything else. And what better way to do it than have some popcorn and watch a movie outside in your car? And eventually, actually within like the next week, I think there was 30 cars. The week after that, or maybe this was all within 2 weeks, because we were doing Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday at one point, because there was nothing else for people to do. But within the third or fourth showing, my daughter came in to the restaurant. I was cooking, and she said, "You need to go look at the parking lot." I walked outside, and there was like 120 cars in the parking lot of the Whistle Stop Café. There were people everywhere. And I said to my daughter, "Oh no, I'm going to jail." That's the first thing I said when I walked out the door, because there was hundreds of people there, and they were parked 6 feet apart and mostly keeping to themselves or whatever. But people were hungry for that because they needed something to do. AHS quickly shut us down over that, because we got to the point where there was 400 or 500 people coming out there a night for these drive-in movies. We made national news over this, and then we made national news again when AHS shut us down, saying that we couldn't operate that because they didn't have a set of rules. And I was livid, because this was something people really, they needed this. This was necessary for people's mental health. And oh yeah, that's a great picture. Yeah. That's actually, okay, so I'll explain that screen. I'll explain that second screen in a second here. But they shut us down. I said, well, this is ridiculous. People can park at Walmart a foot from each other. Actually, the Walmart parking lots, I think you get about 2 inches space between cars. They can go to Costco, they can go to Walmart, they can go to big box stores and brush up against each other, go and touch every bag of chips on the shelf, put it back, and then someone else comes and touches it as well. And I've done something here that basically follows all the rules that were in place. And at that time, my staff wore masks. We had hand sanitizers everywhere. But they shut us down. And I said to them, "Are you guys really want to do this?" I mean, by that time, our Facebook following, I think, had exploded, and we had 5,000 people following because of this drive-in movie thing. And they said, "No, you can't do this. If you do this, we're going to take your food handling permit." And so I took to social media, and the support was absolutely overwhelming. The AHS got so many phone calls and emails and handwritten letters that it actually forced them to spend a couple days in a conference room with all of these bigwig managers from all across the central zone, and they wrote a set of rules for the Whistle Stop Café for a drive-in movie theater. And then they contacted me the next week, after it had been all over the news that AHS was doing this to people, like just trying to do something to help their family get through this. And they caved, and they let me reopen again with a bunch of stipulations. Like I wasn't allowed to let people use the washroom, and people weren't allowed out of their cars, and they couldn't have their windows rolled down, and just a bunch of ridiculous rules. But we followed them anyway so that we could continue doing that. So when we opened in defiance of the restrictions, AHS and I already had a little bit of a strained relationship, because I knew that a lot of their rules were there just for the sake of having rules. And they knew that I wasn't going to tolerate any crap and any ridiculous overreach into my life or the operation of my business. So yeah, I don't think they expected it, but once they started getting calls about me, I'm sure they remembered who I was and what they were up against. Although they didn't really think I was much of a fight at the time anyway.
So you'd poked the bear, and
I did.
was that
Yes, absolutely.
the first time that it became clear to you that these COVID restrictions were about a lot more than just public health? That there was something
Yes.
sinister about them. Had you suspected that earlier, and those suspicions were just confirmed by what happened there, or were you shocked by the response that that Alberta Health Services had to your drive-in movie, your impromptu drive-in movie theater that we saw a picture of a few moments ago?
See, the drive-in movie, I thought they would have been happy about that, because they're always talking about how mental health is the most underreported and least acknowledged health crisis we have in Alberta. And in doing something to try and improve that situation, if they followed their own mandates, and I don't mean COVID mandates, I mean their own mission statement, a congratulations would have been in order, because I had figured out how to do something to benefit people in their mental health situation, and I was still following the rules. But that wasn't the case. It was around that time that I started to wonder if maybe there was something wrong with the way our systems were set up, in particular, how much power our public health and environmental public health inspectors had. And that actually goes right up to the Minister of Health and the Chief Medical Officer of Health. Through that whole thing, I learned a lot of things that I never would have about where we find ourselves right now in Alberta and in any province of Canada, in that the Department of Public Health in our provinces has almost unlimited power and very, very little accountability. I filed a claim with a couple other plaintiffs against AHS for their response and what they did to our businesses. And I was basically told that we would have to prove that they were acting in bad faith, because the legislation states that this isn't verbatim, but it's in plain English. It states they can do whatever they want in the what do you call it, the performing their duties, as long as it's in good faith. And good faith is a very, very objective term. How does a regular person like me prove that it was in bad faith? Do I have to talk to world-renowned scientists and legal experts to prove that what they did wasn't appropriate? Because I've done that. Do I have to file a $100,000 class act or a $100,000 lawsuit against them and prove that I was innocent the whole time? Because we're doing that. But there's some big problems with that.
The Public Health Act actually sets up a health dictatorship, in a sense, in that it provides the Chief Medical Officer of Health, who is Dina Hinshaw, with the authority to use any means necessary to fight COVID. That's essentially what it says. And
for our safety.
Of course, right. That's it, in the name of public health, which has been construed very, very broadly. And so you're running up against this monolithic, ubiquitous government power that's shutting down your business, and also threatening your liberty. And it's at one point, the government became so intent upon stopping you and stopping every other person in Alberta from engaging in any public protest of government COVID restrictions, that they brought an injunction that prevented every man, woman, and child in Alberta from doing just that, from daring to engage in any type of protest, gathering for any type of protest against these COVID restrictions. And of course, that injunction was named after your restaurant, and ultimately, and correct me if this is wrong, your refusal to abide by that injunction ultimately got you arrested and charged. Is that right?
Yes, it did. I got arrested and charged with contempt of court.
and ultimately you fought that case, but you were found guilty of contempt, right? You were found to be in breach of that injunction, and then you were sanctioned by the court. Is that right?
Yes, and to be clear, I don't have contempt for the court per se. Where I'm contemptuous is in I have contempt for any organization, uh, even the Court of Queen's Bench, the Supreme Court, whatever, that assists the government in keeping us in submission like that. I have contempt for those kind of actions. I have contempt for legislation that says the government can do whatever they want, and I have to prove it later that they shouldn't have done it to me after I've already been harmed out of my own pocket. I have some serious contempt for that. So while I respect the court and the officers of the court, those actions, especially something like that injunction that was got ex parte, and for anyone listening who doesn't know, that means that they could do it without me being there. And one of the fundamental parts of fundamentals of justice is that I have the right to face my accuser in court. There's a reason for that. That's so that people like a tyrannical government can't go to court and harm you in some way without you having your voice heard. And that's where we're at. We're at a place where the government is legally and lawfully allowed to do those things to us. And we have very, very little opportunity to either stop it or remedy it. I was just advised that my claim against HS and the Alberta government is going to run upwards of $100,000, and like just to start, and probably take 8 or 10 years. And how is that fair? It's not fair at all. And that's just not for me. That's not just for me. That's for any person in this province or in this country that has a problem with what the government's doing. That's what you're faced with. And we'll continue on that same path you're on, but maybe we'll talk about that a little later.
Oh, absolutely. We're going to get to everything you want to talk about. But you're quite right. There is a clear inequality, disparity between the resources. They're almost inexhaustible resources of the state, or at least they regard them as inexhaustible. Margaret Thatcher would say at a certain point, the government runs out of other people's money. But in any case, in relation to this injunction and your fight against it, obviously that took immense courage. You're risking really everything: your liberty, your business, your money. Your business is shut down during this time. You couldn't pay your employees. Obviously having to dip into your savings to take care of your family. Ultimately, though, my understanding is that you appealed the decision to sanction you, and my understanding is that, correct me if this is wrong, but my impression, and the reason why I've sort of put this label of freedom fighter on you, is that you haven't hesitated to say that as a citizen, as a Canadian, you have the ability to protest and to disobey an unjust law. And in fact, that finds a lot of support historically in philosophical literature. For example, people like John Locke, the English philosopher, and Thomas Jefferson, who is one of the framers of the U.S. Constitution, they wrote extensively not only on the right of a citizen to oppose and defy an unjust law, but they even went so far as to say that there's a positive duty on us, because we are the beneficiaries of liberty, to protect it by defying a government which encroaches upon liberty. And it sounds to me like that's precisely the approach that you've taken. And is it true also that you've appealed that decision to find you in contempt of court, and that your appeal is ongoing?
Yes, I have, and I think my appeal is going to be heard in sometime in June. I can't remember. Did I forward you a copy of that filed appeal?
I did. I saw it. Yes.
Okay,
and so that's coming up. That's going to be heard in sometime in June. It's important to note here for people taking this in that, of course, in July of last year, when all of these restrictions were removed, the injunction that was placed upon the Whistle Stop Café was vacated by the government. and yet they're still maintaining their prosecution of you, right?
Well, it wasn't vacated.
So the injunction, your understanding is that it's still in place?
As far as I know. So basically what that injunction says is that I have to follow the Public Health Act. Now, the reason they did that is because, and by AHS's own admission, they have zero authority to enforce anything. So if you have a restaurant and you open in defiance of what AHS is doing, they cannot enforce. They have to go to a court and get the court to do something to enforce. For instance, get an injunction. So then, if you do something that AHS says you can't do, they go tell daddy, and then daddy gives you a contempt charge. It's not actually a charge. It's not what people think. So that was one of the statements that Justice Germain said when he was sentencing me, was that for the at least the period of my probation and for an undetermined amount of time, that injunction still applies to me. So if there's another lockdown and I hold a protest, I go back to jail. And that time, the next time, which I'm sure there will be, I'll be charged with criminal contempt because it's round 2. And I've apologized to the court for being contemptuous in my actions. And I said my contempt wasn't with the court; it was with the COVID mandates and restrictions, and I was simply exercising my right to protest. Which I'm sorry, Justice Germain and Associate Chief Justice Rook, but my right to protest is inalienable in this country. But they don't see it that way.
So let's talk a little bit about what you've done in your own life in terms of reacting to government tyranny. In talking to you, it's my understanding that your public fight, drew a lot of support to you. You mentioned that you have almost 121,000 followers now. I take it you didn't have that following before you came into the public eye over COVID-19. But my understanding is that you have attempted and worked very hard to draw that public support and sort of sharpen it into a weapon that can be used to defend freedom. And I'd like to talk a little bit about some of these activities. So for one thing, you started your own Facebook page, right? To sort of gather as a meeting place for people who want to show support and share stories about what was happening to them. But you also launched an organization called Full Steam Ahead. Would you like to tell us more about Full Steam Ahead, what it is, and why you started it?
Sure. And thank you for asking. So it's actually called WS Full Steam Ahead. And the reason for the WS is because Full Steam Ahead was already taken. It's actually, I believe it's a cannabis processing company or something like that. So anyway, it's wsfullsteamahead.org. And our mission statement very basically says our mission statement is to advocate for those who have been affected by the COVID restrictions and mandates. So, people who have been fired from their jobs or they lost a loved one or whatever. That one has proven to be really tricky because there's thousands and thousands of them. But even more important than that, we want to grow into an organization with enough voices and enough involvement that we can actually contribute to shaping and forming policy in this province. So when the government does something that's really stupid or unconstitutional, we want to be the folks who stand up and say, hey, we have 500,000 members in our organization, and we do not like what you're doing, government, so you better rethink that. We want to be able to lobby and influence government policy on behalf of freedom-minded individuals in Alberta.
And my understanding is that, and this may be connected to Full Steam Ahead, but that you've also become politically active in terms of founding a new political movement, which is aimed at fighting government tyranny and affecting political change within Alberta. And I also understand you had a meeting just this past weekend in Red Deer that many supporters attended. Would you like to tell us a little bit about that, what the focus of that meeting was?
Sure. Yeah. First off, we didn't form a new organization to do that. Our mission statement with WSFullSteamAhead.org, it actually encompasses this, because if we want to help shape policy and make sure that the government is accountable to people, what better way than making sure that the government who's governing is freedom minded, right? So in Alberta right now, we have three independence-minded political parties, plus one group that's not a registered political party yet, but they want to basically become a 51st state. Then we also have the United Conservative Party, who is not freedom-minded and has failed us at every turn, right from the constituency association boards to the MLAs to the premier. Then we have organizations like the Alberta Prosperity Project. They're very similar to WS Full Steam Ahead, except they're an educational organization, and their mission statement, I believe it's to educate, inspire, and inform Albertans as to the merits of independence. Now, the reason I've become so involved in that is because if you take time to look at what's going on right now in the province, and then you look at the bigger picture of what's going on in the country, and you consider the types of changes that need to be made to prevent these things from happening again, and to make sure that nobody's left behind. And I don't mean just business owners who potentially could be locked down, but I also mean people who might get a communicable disease and need proper treatment. Those people shouldn't be denied effective treatment because a government organization says so. So if you consider everything, all of those things, the only answer to us getting out of this and getting to a point where we can be prosperous and nobody's left behind is an independent Alberta. So that's what Alberta Prosperity Project is. Now, if you have three political parties in Alberta that are independence minded, that's going to create some extreme confusion on election day. Nobody's going to know what to do, and they're probably going to vote UCP or NDP because they're confused. And somebody pointed out to me, if you are confused, you will lose. So I approached some of the board members and the leadership, the people in leadership roles of these parties and organizations, and I said, look, we need to get in a room together and decide. I'm not going to say what I said to them. I'll tell you what I said in the meeting. I basically laid it out like this. We have an impending own nothing and be happy scenario on our hands because of what the federal government wants to do to this country. It's going to happen. It's already in the work. The wheels are already in motion. It's coming. Right from universal basic income to digital ID to federal government buybacks of mortgages with the condition that you have to do what the government says. It is in the works right now. If we spend the next 54 weeks trying to argue over our minor differences, even though our ideology and our goal is the same, conservatives, historically, they'll agree on 95% of things. The 5% of things they don't agree on cause fractures in their groups, and you end up with new parties. CPC and PPC, Maverick Party. Wild Rose Independence Party of Alberta, the Advantage Party of Alberta, the Independence Party of Alberta. They all have very similar ideology. There's just very minor differences that they don't agree on. And so I said to them, this is what we're faced with. We don't have time to worry about that 5% right now. If we swing and we miss at independence in May 2023, we will not get that opportunity again, because we will be right into the own nothing and be happy, and we will not be able to stop it. Certainly not as part of Confederation. So I said, you guys better get to the table and figure out what your obstacles are and how to overcome them so that we can work together to succeed in this task. And it created a lot of buzz and a lot of interest. A few of them have reached out to me over the past couple weeks, and they want to meet again. They want to get this done so that we can do it. Because if you watch the news right now and you look at what Premier Kenny and Rachel Notley and even the Take Back Alberta group are saying, they only ever mention two options. The UCP says, vote for us, otherwise you're going to get NDP. Well, the NDP sucks, so we better vote for UCP, even though they suck, right? No. The NDP says, if you don't vote for us, you're going to end up with another Jason Kenney. That's not true at all. TBA says, if you don't vote for UCP, you're going to end up with Rachel Notley. That's not true. There's a third option. And the third option is comprised of those folks who drove to Ottawa and who lined the streets of this country because they're so hungry for change. That is the third option. And when these political parties agree to put that 5% aside and unify and say, we are the third option, those people will be there to support it. So that's my goal, is to encourage and motivate people to do what's right, not vote for someone because you're fearful of another party winning. Get involved, do what you know is right, and know that you're not alone in thinking that both of those two options are garbage. You're not alone. And the vast majority of Albertans agree with you. So if we can get that message out there and let enough people know how many like-minded people there are, option 3, which is the people of Alberta who are freedom-minded, will take this province by storm. And we will win against the Own Nothing and Be Happy. We will not be part of the Great Reset, and we'll be the most prosperous nation on the planet. But this is all hinging on conservative-minded individuals who are classically independent, agreeing to put their egos aside and work together. It's like herding cats, but we will herd those cats. I have 5 of them. I have experience, and I'm going to get it done.
Well, let's hope those cats are lions and tigers.
Yeah.
So I want to get into some of the deeper issues with you, because I know you have some very strong and well thought out opinions about what's going on, why this is all happening. But before we go there, you alluded to the Freedom Convoy, and this is a very important topic. And I want to take advantage of having you here because you're an eyewitness to what occurred there. You were very involved in it. And I want to find out from you not only why you became involved in the Freedom Convoy, but also what your role in it was and what you hope to accomplish by the Freedom Convoy. So can you take us back a couple of months now? When did you first start to learn about the Freedom Convoy and what was being planned?
I saw a TikTok. Bridget and Chris, they did some TikToks, and I was like, wow, that sounds like a great idea. I hope the truckers get this done. And immediately I thought about the convoy to Ottawa that Glenn Carrott and Pat King and some other folks did a few years back. I thought, wow, that's awesome. Nice little protest. Let our voices be heard in Ottawa. That's great. Then some folks got involved in it that I'm not aligned with. I don't disagree with them. I don't condemn them or condone them. I let them do their own thing, and I just do my own thing. And once those folks got involved, I thought, you know what? I'm not going to get involved in this because I don't like where that path goes. I don't subscribe to the free man on the land stuff, the sovereign citizen, any of that stuff. And it's not because I don't believe there's any merit to it. There may be some merit there, but at the end of the day, if you live within a society that believes that the rules and laws and everything that are current are the right ones, they hire the men with the guns, they own the jails. So it doesn't matter if the sovereign citizen and the free man stuff is true or not. Society says, you're crazy, we're putting you in jail. You cannot drive around without a driver's license, kind of thing, right? Mm-hmm. So I put that out of my mind. Anyway, once I can't remember exactly when I decided to go, but I was toying with the idea, and it was a really bad time to go because I had just got off a couple weeks of work. I was off a couple weeks of work because I had a injury on my foot and it took forever to heal. So I was already down 2 weeks. And then this convoy's coming up, and I thought, yeah, no, I'm not going to go. I can't afford to take that much time off work. But something happened. I think I was watching the page grow and some of the things that people were saying, and I thought, like, this light bulb came on. Because right from the very beginning, I've been waiting for something to be a catalyst for people to get off their asses and get engaged and involved in the fight that we're in right now. Originally, I thought it would be the restaurateurs. You know, they're losing their businesses. They'll be standing up for sure. Didn't happen. 85 restaurants in Calgary said they were going to open the second time they locked us down. They all stayed open until AHS told them to close, and then they tucked and ran. And I don't blame them, because it's a very intimidating thing going against the government. Then it was the AHS healthcare workers. And I even held a rally at the Whistle Stop for AHS workers who had been not harassing me, but, you know, trying to close my business down for months. I held a rally for them because I thought, if they're going after the doctors and nurses who were the ones that helped us through this purported pandemic, maybe this will open people's eyes, and this will be what they get behind in order to rise up and tell the government this enough is enough. It didn't happen. Then I thought the CN rail workers would do it. It didn't happen. Then I thought the oil field workers would do it. It didn't happen. All of these things that should have been catalysts and should have opened people's eyes and given them something to rally around, just like they rallied around a little restaurant in the middle of nowhere who was having their drive-in movie theater closed down. It never happened. And I was waiting and waiting and waiting. And then this convoy got rolling, and the momentum was building. And I thought, this is it. What better thing for Canadians to get behind than a bunch of 90,000-pound vehicles with air horns rolling down the highway and making a huge spectacle all across the country? I thought, this is it. This is going to do it for sure. And I said to my staff, I got to go. I need you to cover. I have to do this. I talked to a friend of mine. He sold me that picker truck for $1 so that I could drive it to Ottawa and back. Another guy sponsored the insurance for it for me. And the total preparation, I decided Friday at 3:30 in the afternoon that I was going to do it. By Friday evening, I owned the truck. My insurance guy worked on the insurance over Saturday and Sunday for me and got it done Sunday afternoon. The guys I bought it from got the CVIP done in over the weekend. And then Monday morning, I had my probation meeting at 10 a.m. So I ran into Lacombe, got my registration and a license plate for it, drove the picker truck to my probation meeting, and left Monday morning at 10 a.m. for the convoy, because I knew that was going to be a monumental thing that people would get behind. And now I didn't realize how big it was going to be until I started seeing people on the overpasses and stuff. Like, that just blew my mind how many people there were. You'd expect a few dozen in every town, but we drove through some towns and it was an hour and a half of like completely packed streets with people cheering these truckers on, because almost everybody in Canada has had enough.
Yeah. Everybody, every reasonable person. Listening to you talk about that drive reminds me of my father-in-law, Jack Locke, is 73 years of age, and I couldn't go, but we sponsored him to go. And just listening to you reminded me of his impressions. He could not believe, the number of people who came out just to stand on the roadsides and wave Canadian flags and hold up signs, and just an incredible, unprecedented situation. I've never seen anything like it in my lifetime in this country. Were you involved at all in the organization of the Freedom Convoy, or did you become involved in it? No, I'm not. Not at all. Not at all. Don't if you don't feel comfortable answering. Don't.
No, it's fine. I don't mind answering. The truth. What does that say? The truth doesn't hide from scrutiny.
Right.
I wasn't involved in organizing it. I helped wherever I could. I did do some fundraising for the folks that were out there. But as for organizing, I mean, I shared the message on our Facebook page. I tried to keep people updated as to what's going on. But when it comes right down to the logistical and organization stuff, I was just as much along for the ride as anybody else. When we got to Ottawa, I did what I could to help in every place that I could, and I found that the biggest way I could help is by getting the information out there. So I was doing live streams all the time, telling people what's going on, trying to make sure that they knew that what the media was telling them was a lie. Like, that was a really important task in my mind. But no, like, as for moving trucks around and that kind of thing, I didn't get a chance to do any of that stuff.
And yet, ultimately, you ended up getting blamed for that because you got named in a lawsuit that was brought by some Ottawa merchants over damages they suffered as a result of the Freedom Convoy. Is that right?
Kind of. I didn't get blamed for that. What that you're talking about, the injunction, I believe?
Yes, and I understand there's a class action in which you got named as a party.
Yeah, that's all a bunch of malarkey. So that injunction was about honking. They were saying that the honking was causing them PTSD and killing their businesses. And if you were there and you saw what I saw, you would have seen thousands of people patronizing the businesses that remained open in Ottawa. They were making record profits. If those businesses wanted to, oh, and by the way, when that injunction was filed and we got it, nobody was honking anymore. As a matter of fact, me and Carrie and Jessica, while we were down there, we spent a lot of our time trying to convince people to not honk anymore because we didn't want to disrupt the residents of Ottawa. Our presence was already known, and we wanted to keep them on our side as friends, not foes. But really, that many people trying to get everyone to agree on something is like herding cats. And I wasn't an organizer or an authority. There was no real authority or leader there. So it was largely ineffective until everybody agreed to just stop honking on their own. Now, if those businesses really wanted to sue somebody or some entity for the harms that their businesses endured, they should be suing the mayor and the mayor's office and the city of Ottawa, because the mayor of Ottawa, Jim Watson, he actually told those businesses that they needed to close because the truckers were violent white supremacists and they were going to destroy their businesses. He told them that the ones that stayed open were not allowed to let anyone use the bathrooms because it's too dangerous with these truckers here. That's the kind of verbiage that was used against peaceful protesters in Ottawa. So those businesses should be suing the ones that are responsible for damages, which would be the city, because they lied to them and they told them to close their businesses based on that lie. Now, this whole idea that the city of Ottawa is going to sue the convoy for $36 million to cover the cost of policing, that is absolute bogus. Because last time I checked, the Constitution or the Charter of Rights and Freedoms doesn't say that I have the right to protest as long as I pay the bill for policing. It doesn't say that. It says I have the right to protest. And if our capital city, if you expect to live there and not ever be exposed to a protest, you should probably give your head a shake or move to another city, because that's where we go to have our voices heard in Canada. Parliament literally means the place to speak. And that's where we go to speak.
You talk about the dishonesty of certain government figures. It reminds me of also the dishonesty of the media. And I understand this is why you were doing such regular posting from the Freedom Convoy. I know I heard of one lady who is a radio personality in Calgary. She actually went to the Freedom Convoy on her own as a vacation just to see what was going on. And she was shocked to find that the reality was so different from what was being reported in the mass media.
Yeah.
She did a Facebook post about it. And ultimately, the company she worked for, which is a company called Stingray Media, a big media conglomerate, told her that she had to take down the post under threat of losing her job. And she very courageously refused. Her name is Heather Prosack, and she lost her job over it. And so this is just another example of the dishonesty and the oppression that's coming not only from government but through the media. And this is where I want to go next with you, Chris, is to talk about some of the deeper underlying issues about why this is happening right now. I know you have some very strong views about this, and you talk about it a lot on your own podcast show, which is a wonderful show that we've mentioned already, the Chris and Carrie show. But what we're seeing right now, and I think you and I will agree about this, over the past several years, governments of Canada have launched malicious targeted attacks upon the Canadian working class. And my question for you is, what is their agenda? What is the Great Reset in the World Economic Forum? And how is the COVID-19 pandemic accelerated the advance of this vile agenda? I know you have some very strong views about this, but also some very well-informed ones that I think people will be very interested to hear.
There's a very long answer to that question, and I
take all the time you
long
need,
answers
sir.
To easy questions, so this might take a while.
Take your time.
Over the last few years, I have become aware, and I'm sure others have, that there are a group of people on this planet with all the money they could ever want, almost all the power they could ever want, and there's nothing really left for them to attain. They have it all. In certain groups' minds, and this is shown in campaigns against our energy industry and against family units and all sorts of things, the human race is a disease on the planet. We are a virus that needs to be stamped out, and we're responsible for everything bad that ever goes on. They believe that the planet cannot accommodate as many people are here, and to save their own skin, they need to reduce the world's population. And if you don't believe me, or if those that are watching don't believe me, all you have to do is go on the United Nations website and look for yourself. It is right there. They actually say, as part of their Sustainable Development Program, that the world's population needs to be reduced to a maximum of 1.5 billion people so that the human race can endure. Now, they're completely offside, and they don't exist in reality on that with that notion, but that's what they believe. They believe that unless a government or an authority takes control over every aspect of our life, including where we live, where we work, what we eat, where we eat, that kind of thing, that the human race will be extinct. And the overarching cause for this would be climate change, which over the last 30 years has been proven to be a hoax over and over and over again. And I'm not talking about the climate changing. I'm talking about anthropological catastrophic climate change caused by man's action on this planet that is unrecoverable. According to Al Gore, we should have been on fire 6 years ago, 2016. Anyway, that is a plan and that these elite folks have to get rid of this scourge on the planet, which is human beings. Now, this started back in the 70s, this way of thinking and these ideas and this plan. And ever since then, I believe that this group of people has been waiting for the right opportunity to implement this sustainable development model. For those of you who are aware, and maybe Leighton, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that Stephen Harper actually signed on to this as Prime Minister in 2008 and maybe in 2016 again, I think.
No, that's true. Actually, he talks about it in his book, which I read recently. Stephen Harper, in a lot of ways, was an excellent Prime Minister, especially in relation to our current one. But he certainly was a globalist.
Yes, he was. And he failed in his duty to do what was best for Canadians. So anyway, Canada is signed on to these things. That's why you see the attacks on industries that are reported to contribute to climate change. Now, keeping in mind that Canada has, I think it's ridiculous, like 0.15% of or 1.5% of global CO2 emissions or something like that. And we are net CO2 recovery with our forests and plants that we have in Canada exceeds the amount of CO2 we produce. But let's ignore that for now. At the end of the day, there are folks within these global organizations like the United Nations and the World Economic Forum and the World Health Organization and those groups who believe that humans need to be stamped out. So along comes COVID. Doesn't matter if it's man-made or if it was naturally occurring in nature, it was here. It happened. And it gave these people the opportunity to implement things that they couldn't implement before. They tried to do this with H1N1. The plan was in place at that time, but the problem then was they didn't have the control over social media that they do now. They didn't have the control over the media. And also there was some verbiage that was wrong in some of the rules. Like for instance, before the definition of pandemic was changed, it said something along the lines of a pandemic is a new or novel strain of influenza in which causes a tremendous amount of excess deaths globally. They changed the definition, and you can look this up if you want. Feel free, please do. And if I'm wrong, challenge me on it. They changed the definition to a new or novel strain of influenza. Just a new or novel strain of influenza. That's it. It doesn't matter if it causes tremendous amounts of death. And as we've seen over the last couple of years, COVID did not cause a tremendous amount of excess deaths. As a matter of fact, in some jurisdictions, there were less deaths than in the previous, the rolling 5-year average. So it did not do that. However, it met the definition of a pandemic because the definition was changed. That is a fact. You can look it up. So now we have a group that wants humans off the planet. We have this prevalent in government, especially in the left and in the United States with the Democratic Party, that basically say own nothing and be happy is the only way to endure as a civilization, as the human race. And that's what they're trying to do. That's why we're shutting down our coal plants and replacing it with inefficient wind and solar. That's why we pay a tax on the air we exhale when we breathe, CO2. And by the way, carbon tax is not a tax on carbon. It is a tax on carbon dioxide, which is plant food. They're two different things. They say carbon, I think, because when you think of carbon, it's dirty, it's dusty, it's gross. We want to clean up that carbon. Carbon dioxide, on the other hand, that's what your plants eat. And that's how you're sustained. They eat that and they provide food for you. So, you know what? I almost forget what the question was, but I think you were asking like a more in-depth. What do I think is happening and why? Right.
Right. Big picture, and also getting down into the weeds, which you've done for us. One question. I realize these are early days, but I'm curious to get your thoughts about what impact you think the Freedom Convoy has had upon the plight, especially of Canadian workers and their global counterparts. I realize it's early days, but do you see that the Freedom Convoy has done something positive, negative, neutral? How do you see it?
When you protest and your government uses the media to try and vilify the protest and then brings in laws that prohibit protesting, you have terrified the government. Our government and governments around the world were absolutely terrified at what they saw, because they saw that the people had had enough. And you remember that there's a picture floating around on the internet of the global elite playing chess on the backs of the working class. Right. And the caption says, if they only knew all they have to do is stand up and the game is over. We stood up and they felt the game coming to an end. And so they dropped the hammer. And like scared little animals, we backed down. But we haven't really backed down. So that's what the convoy did in my mind. It terrified our government. The government's response, I don't know if you're aware of this, Leighton. I'm sure you are, because your brain is twice the size of mine. But the government's response,
larger head.
It almost collapsed the banking system in Canada. We had a 500% more cash withdrawals in 2 days than the maximum before over a month. When Trudeau started freezing people's bank accounts and they took their money out, that was big news. And the news didn't tell you this, but that was huge, because then the banks went to the prime minister and they said, Listen, Justin, you better back off or you're going to collapse the financial system. Banks lend out money at a rate of 10 to 1. So if they have $1 in an account, they will lend out 10. If you take out even 10% of the money that a bank holds, they will fail and you will completely cripple the banking industry. That is how much power the people have. And that is how fragile that's how fragile their system is. We only have to stand up a little bit, and we cause so many problems for them that they start shaking in their boots and scrambling to enact unlawful, unconstitutional laws to keep us in check. And unless we continue to stand up and use our voices, I've said this before, but our voices prevent bloodshed because when we're speaking, we're not fighting. Sound is the most powerful force in the universe. I believe that the universe was spoken into existence with sound. And it's the sounds we make that will change the world. When we stop using our sound, the only thing left is violence. And in Canada, we don't have that option. We don't have a well-armed militia that's a lawful well-armed militia that is there to protect the people from tyrannical government. We don't have that. We don't have a military that swears an oath to uphold our rights and our freedoms and the Constitution on our behalf. We don't even have, the RCMP don't even do that. The RCMP swear an oath to the Crown. The only thing we have here in Canada is our voices and our right to protest. And when that ends, we either end up in complete submission or there's bloodshed. And neither of those options are okay with me, which is why I continue to use my voice.
What you just said there is very fascinating for a couple of reasons. Number one, of course, the left is constantly saying that words are violence, but it's only the words that they don't like. So that, for example, when a conservative commentator like Jordan Peterson wants to go speak at a university, it sends all of the young undergraduates heading for their safe spaces because they can't stand to hear what he has to say. That's one part of it. The other part of what you said, which is fascinating, is that, and here I'm drawing from a man named Dennis Prager, with whom you're probably familiar, PragerU. Many people might not realize Dennis Prager is a very renowned biblical scholar, and he's written a wonderful book called The Rational Bible. And in his commentary about the book, he says something very like what you just said, Chris. He says that when you go back and you look at the book of Genesis, God speaks the universe into existence. And of course, by extension, our rights, our God-given rights, as you've termed them, they are manifestations of the will of God. So these natural rights are God-given. They're not handed out to us like so much Halloween candy from the state. They exist. They're above the state. And of course, in our charter, it says that all of our charter rights and all of our laws are subject to the supremacy of God and the rule of law, which are closely connected. But you're so right. The last thing that our rulers want us to do right now is to speak our rights and to speak these words into existence, because the more that we assert them, as you quite rightly say, and I totally agree with you about this, we speak these rights into existence, and the more we speak them into existence, the more their existence is confirmed into reality. And when we stop speaking them, that is when they die. That is when they perish. So I really like what you just said there, and I think it has a lot of foundation, not only in law but in our deeper culture. So that ties me into maybe the last thing, or next to last thing I want to ask you about, and that is, okay, one of the things that we can do is peacefully protest. We can speak these rights into existence in the way you've described. How else can we fight back and help to restore our cherished civil liberties, let's say through civil disobedience? What else can we do? For example, what is the fuller mission of Full Steam Ahead, for example?
Well, as I said before, we want to become a big enough voice and have a big enough membership that we can effectively influence government policy. That's the idea, because as somebody that I recently met pointed out, if you bring enough people, you can be the change that you're asking for. It just takes people. So if our membership is big enough, and we say, hey, we don't like this unconstitutional policy or law that your government is bringing in, and if you do this, we're going to remove you, and we have the power to do that. Done. They want to keep power, so they don't do that. And on the like, talking about civil disobedience only goes so far. And I say that because civil disobedience, there's two paths, there's two outcomes. The first one is you garner enough support from enough people and they all are civilly disobedient that the entire structure comes down. That didn't happen in our case. In my case, my civil disobedience and those around me, that got enough people aware of what was going on that they started to ask questions and look for solutions. So while we didn't have like India gaining their independence or freeing themselves from the British exercise of civil disobedience, what we did see was a mass awakening of people who otherwise wouldn't have paid attention.
Right.
Now, with that, like, that momentum has to be turned into action. That has to be capitalized on in order to make any kind of an effective change. Because right now, if you exercise civil disobedience, for sure, for me, I'll just go to jail, and you may too. And the courts are not, they're not on our side. And maybe our lawyers haven't given the courts enough evidence and reason to side with us. But as of now, I don't think it's really happened. Stuff's been thrown out, but we haven't really won anything. So we have all these people who are aware that there's a problem and they want to make change. So what do? Well, you get all these people together and you educate them. Here's another plug for Alberta Independence. You educate them as to what the problem is. What happens if we don't fix this problem? Then we tell them how to fix it and what's going to happen afterwards. And we motivate them to get involved and to be that change. This is not about, for me, Alberta Independence is not about leaving Canada or separating from anything. We can't separate from Canada. It's physically impossible. We're right smack kind of in there, where we have Canada on both sides. We're staying put. But independence is another story. And I use this analogy sometimes to describe this. So I love my mother and my father. I lived under their roof, under their rules, and I could prosper as much as they allowed me to because of their rules. And at some point, I had to grow up and move out of their house because I wanted to prosper differently under my own terms with my own rules. And that's how I see Alberta's position within Canada right now. That's the first thing, is we've outgrown the federal government. And the federal government is hindering us at every turn. The other thing I like to say is that if you, even just thinking back to what I did opening my restaurant and how many people were encouraged by that, if you stand up and you lead by example and you show people a clear path to success and prosperity, they will follow you if you're a good leader. Alberta has a golden opportunity to become a world leader right now in saying, we are going to be free people. This is what we're going to do. Here's the path to do it. Will you follow us? And when Alberta has a successful referendum on independence and we start negotiating with the federal government, the provinces next door are going to say, you know what? That's actually a really enticing offer, because we don't really want to own nothing and be unhappy either. But somebody has to stand up first. And right now, it's going to be Alberta, because for some reason, maybe it's because we have a little bit of a Wild West history, we've been the province that's been the most vocal and the most outspoken and the most civilly disobedient, because we want to be free. Once we do that and we lead by example for the rest of Canada, that will motivate and encourage them to do the same thing. And it's not that I want to be free of Canada. I want to be free of a tyrannical federal government. And we're not going to be able to do that, especially considering the juggernaut that Justin Singh has become now. Mm-hmm. Like, that's how do you beat that? The left knows their strength in numbers, and they're taking a page from our playbook, and they're uniting and putting their differences aside so they can retain the power they already have. And if we don't do that here in Alberta and take this province out of Confederation, we will be subject to an NDP and a Liberal coalition majority government who both want to lead us down a path to communism. Now, stop jumping up and down in your living room watching me tell you that they're taking us to communism. If you don't believe me, go and look at the NDP's website and read their manifesto. It literally is the path. It is communism by another name. And if you replace where they say socialism with Marxism or communism, that's exactly what it is. So before you get upset with me for calling the NDP manifesto communist, look yourself. It is right there. It's in black and white. It talks about how you will no longer own your business. The government will own it. The government will select people to run these businesses. The government will tell you where to live. The government will tell you how many animals you can have on your farm. The government will tell you how much wheat you can produce in a year, or milk. Oh wait, they already do some of these things because it's already started. I don't want that. I don't want that for me. I don't want that for my kids. I don't want that for my grandchildren. And you shouldn't either. Because if you look at any place that communism has reared its ugly head in the world and across history, it has never worked out well for the people. It's worked out well for a very elite few at the helm who are controlling the media and telling the people that it's for their own good, but it's never worked out well for the people. As a matter of fact, it always ends with blood running through the streets. And that is not a Canadian ideal.
Yeah, Sir Winston Churchill called it the failed ideology, the ideology of failure, and that it produces perfect equality because we all starve together.
Yeah, exactly. It only works for bees because bees aren't people. Bees aren't born with greed. People are. Communism works for bees, not people.
Yes, that's true. That's very true. One other point, just to tie into what you said, it actually is a fact that the Communist Manifesto is called that. It was written by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, and the foundational document for the NDP party, formerly the Cooperative Commonwealth Federation, which is a farmers' party, is called the Regina Manifesto. And
I didn't know that.
It is fundamentally a Marxist document. That is the foundational, that is the constitution of the New Democratic Party. So, Chris, as usual, you just hit the nail right on the head. So you talk about taking action, and you've walked your talk. You take action in a number of different ways. You talk about this every week on your podcast. But you also are saying that this action takes money. We're going to have to raise money to fight these fights. So, for example, if somebody wanted to donate to Full Steam Ahead to help support and fund some of the initiatives that you and your group and your team are working on, how would they do that? How would they get in touch with you and make that connection? Is that even possible at this stage?
Yeah, of course. I mean, we are. And actually, I should have asked you this before. I believe your firm is working on our registration stuff. So I think at the moment we are in the process of becoming a registered nonprofit organization. We have links on our webpage, www.wsfullsteamahead.org, where you can become a member and you can make donations. And we certainly appreciate that. And you're right, Leighton, it is ridiculously expensive. However, I am very happy that the price that we have to pay for our freedom right now is in dollars and not in limbs like our forefathers did.
Right.
This stuff is expensive. I have this plan that I'm going to get some literature out to every household in Alberta. So if you consider how many people live per household and how many people have, you're not allowed, they don't accept flyers or pamphlets or anything in their mailbox. It's about 1.5 million mailboxes that we need to reach. Now, how much does it cost to mail a letter to 1.5 million people? That's like $800,000, $900,000. It's about $750,000 to go drop it at the post office and have it mass mailed. So these things are not cheap. Now, if let's think back a couple months. Remember when you got that vaccination pamphlet from the Alberta government?
Right.
Do you imagine what that cost? That's an overweight piece of mail.
Yeah.
Right. That probably cost the Albertan taxpayers $1.5 million to get those out to everybody's mailbox. But it's just the way it is. I mean, reaching people costs money. Even for me to do my live streams that I do here, I had to go buy a new computer and a monitor and some like multimedia stuff. I'm into it for like $4,000. Nothing is cheap, but it's well worth it. We have some very wealthy benefactors behind us at Full Steam Ahead, and they're entirely prepared to write big checks for us as long as we can show that we're motivating people and getting them involved, and people are volunteering and maybe setting up chapters in their own town and handing stuff out and holding events. There are people that will help with that kind of stuff, but to get that going, it's expensive.
One suggestion, perhaps you've thought of this. We recently had Pastor James Coates on our program, and he's written a book, co-authored a book that talks a lot about his experiences, which parallel yours in a lot of ways in terms of being someone who resisted the pandemic oppression of the Alberta government. But perhaps you might consider writing your own book and using the proceeds to help fund some of your initiatives. That's just a thought. I'm stealing an idea from Pastor Coates, but maybe that could help. So I want to leave off on a couple of points. Part of the format of our program, Chris, is that we try to leave the consumers of the podcast with a link to a website or a book or something like that. That could help them further their understanding. In other words, if what they've listened to over the last hour and a half or so of you and I talking has intrigued them and they're fascinated, try to give them an idea of where they could go to get more information and maybe further their discovery. One book that I would recommend, and actually I just wrote an essay about it recently that was published on a website called the Frontier Center for Public Policy, is a book called Our Enemy the State by Albert Nock. It was written about 90 years ago, but it's a very prescient work in that when you read it, so much of that book applies to what is happening in Canada and in the world today. And you're going to find there support for a lot of the things that Chris was talking about a few minutes ago when I was asking him about what he thought the deeper issues were, the deeper undercurrents were for the things that we're seeing in both in Canada and globally in terms of the economic and political and social oppression and the dangers of it. And what Albert Nock said, he accurately predicted not only the onset of the Great Depression, which in a lot of ways was caused by policies similar to the ones that we saw during the pandemic. But he also said that the Great Depression was an inevitable prelude to war. And of course, we're seeing remilitarization and military conflict around the world right now, not only in the Ukraine. We're hearing about China about to go into Taiwan. We're hearing about North Korea, Iran. So it's a very prescient book, even though it's 90 years old. Many people reading it are going to be horrified to see that the same conditions that led to all of the horrors that Chris just talked about, that we saw during the last half of the 20th century, were all there in the 1930s. And the 1930s look a lot like the 2020s so far. So that's one that I would recommend. Chris, do you have an idea, someplace you'd recommend people look for more information about the topics that we've been discussing today?
Sure. First, I want to make a comment. There's a book I've read before. Actually, I've read it a few times, not the whole thing, but parts of it. And it talked about what you just mentioned. There was something in there about war and rumors of war in the end times. Can't remember what the book was called, but maybe it'll come to me.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody knows what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so for information about my organization, our organization, wsfullsteamahead.org, it's www.wsfullsteamahead.org. It's spelled just the way it sounds. My Facebook page, of course, is where I share most of my thoughts and opinions and information as to what's going on. Lots of ideas about solutions. Actually, it's mostly about solutions now because I'm done thinking about what they are trying to do to us, no matter who they are and what they're trying to do. My goal now is to focus 100% on the solution for everything they throw at us. That's all on my Facebook page. I do have another group. It's called the Whistle Stop Café Supporters. It's a private page that you have to actually. It's a subscription page, so it's like $6 a month. But I'm going to be sharing some more of my more intimate and like important details of what's going on. If you have questions or you disagree with the idea of independence, visit www.albertaprosperity.com and read through the literature. It's all there. The policy and governance documents, the platform, and the bylaws that they propose, any government can adopt and put Alberta on the path to independence and prosperity. It also has a list of where the events are going. Now, if you want to read a very, very in-depth book about current events that kind of gives you, it kind of forces you to look at things a different way. Like the authors of this book, they're probably some of the smartest on the planet. They're damn near philosophers. I would like to invite you to check out Mad Magazine. As a kid, I read this, and I picked them back up as an adult, and I had no idea the amount of in-depth political discussion that goes on in this magazine and the way they frame it in satire and makes you really think about things. Unbelievable. And, of course, the best part of Mad Magazine has always been
the fold out.
Spy versus Spy.
Spy versus Spy. Okay.
So highly recommend it. Top of your reading list. Should be on your bookshelf.
And I'm glad that you went there because this is a segue. We've got to have this discussion. Okay. We're both fans of the Marvel Universe. And you and I have had this discussion. You're a real big Spider-Man guy. You've told me why. And you know that I think the greatest Marvel hero is Thor. So, since you're the guest, I'm going to let you go first. Make the case for Spider-Man. Why is Spider-Man the most compelling hero in the Marvel Universe for you?
Well, you know what? I don't think Spider-Man was actually the most compelling in the Marvel Universe, but I really appreciate him, and here's why. So Spider-Man is an average person, completely average in every way, needs glasses, kind of nerdy, takes pictures for a living, shares information. And all of a sudden, Spider-Man has this incredible power bestowed on him. And with that great power came great responsibility. And Spider-Man was very conflicted with the powers he had, and he was very driven by the knowledge that those powers required him to use it to benefit mankind in the most impactful way possible. So I don't know, like as this is all unraveled and people are watching what I'm doing, and I get hundreds of messages, thousands of messages a month. People have come to me and said, I've got all this money and I want you to run as premier. People have said, we want you to be a spearhead of our organization. We want you to speak here. We want you to speak there. The weight of that is, I feel that. I feel like I have a responsibility to do something with the support that people have given me. So I can't shoot webs out of my wrists, but my girlfriend's way hotter than Spider-Man's girlfriend, so I got that going for me. But yeah, that's why I like Spider-Man, because he never asked for any of that. He wasn't born a half god, half man. He was just a regular old person that was thrown into it and forced to change his life in order to serve his fellow man.
That is a great message, and it's a great metaphor for all of us, isn't it? And I'm a huge fan of Spider-Man. I I think that in a real sense, Thor. The reason why I'm attracted to the Thor metaphor is, of course, because of its deep tradition in Norse mythology, but also he's a god, but he's a god with a vulnerability. And the vulnerability is that he is attracted to human beings and the plight of human beings. And I think this is a great message for our leaders, that although you're given these godlike powers, it's very important to have an understanding of the vulnerability of human beings, and that your role is to use this great power in the service of them and in the protection of them, as opposed to the abuse of them, which is what, of course, all of the Marvel villains do, aren't they? I mean, if you think of it, the great from the Marvel movies, in the end, the great Titanic Marvel villain, he really wants to execute the same plan that the World Economic Forum does in terms of getting rid of half of the people in the universe. And so these are heroes, and they are comic book heroes, but I think we can agree that in their own ways, they are stories of responsibility, and they are inspiring stories. And hopefully this discussion that we've had today will inspire everyone who's listened to or watched this podcast to be heroes in their own world. A great way to think of yourself, and this is, I'm quoting Jerry Seinfeld, is to think of yourself as a low-level superhero. That's a great way to get through life, because it gives you a sense that as an individual, you're capable of doing special things. And I think the guest that we've had today, Chris Scott, is someone who's proven that. He's an everyman, but he's, over the past couple of years, he's taken upon himself the role of doing extraordinary things. And I think he's a wonderful example to all Canadians, to all Albertans, of what can be done if you have some courage and you make the right decisions and your heart is in the right place and you're trying to help people. And I want to thank you very much, Chris, for all that you've done, for being a great example to all Albertans and all Canadians, for your courage, and also for taking the time to share all of that with us today, and also for opening up your mind and sharing with us your ideas and also your optimism. I see one of the things I like about your message is that it's one of hope, and it's one which inspires people to take responsibility and to take action. Just thinking about full steam ahead. I think I said this on your program the other night. I love the image of it. It's full, it's all out. Steam is power, and you're moving ahead. You're making a difference. You're making change. So I want to thank you so much for being here today, being with us, and for sharing such a positive message with our viewers.
My pleasure. And I like that. I like what you said about Thor and about considering yourself a low level superhero. And if you're watching this and you're wondering, like, oh, what can I do? I'd be a terrible superhero. If you've ever watched the movie, oh my goodness, I can't remember. It doesn't matter. It was just a movie. But there were some superheroes in there who were very unlikely heroes. The Shoveler and the Blue Raja, Captain Rage or Mr. Rage or something, played by Ben Stiller.
Yes.
Just like a complete motley crew of superheroes. And regardless of their abilities, they did something and they worked together and they achieved their goals. And of course, it's just a movie, but it's something to think about. You don't have to have superpowers.
Was that called The Replacements? Is that the name of it? Or am I thinking of a different movie?
That was a different one. This one was called, oh my goodness.
Is it the one with Will Smith in it?
No.
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
No, it was a Ben Stiller movie.
Oh, yes. I know the movie you're talking about. Yeah. Very funny.
I can't remember. But
his movies are all funny.
Yeah.
Anyway, Chris, thanks again for being with us today. All the best. We should also mention the Chris and Carrie show. I believe it's on every Wednesday night. Is that right? Is it on at a set time?
Well, it's kind of on whenever Carrie decides to join me. I mean, he's always too busy for me and making excuses constantly. Last night I wanted to do it live before you and I did this, but he has had to shave his legs or something. I don't know what's going on with him. We just do it when we can, but we're going to try and do one. We're going to try and do one this afternoon, which would be March 23rd.
Okay. Well, again, Chris, thanks very much for being with us, and best of luck with all of your endeavors. And we're going to try and get those links out that you mentioned so that people can access them when they watch this podcast. Thanks again for being with us today. We're very grateful for having you on and for sharing your ideas and your thoughts with us today.
My pleasure. Thanks, Leighton.
Okay.